So I'd like to start out by addressing some of the common problems we've heard from our customers prior to their joining the Kenna platform. What they told us was that their vulnerability management process was needlessly difficult. First of all, their scanners produced reams of data whenever they scan, and it took too long to sort through it all, whether that be in the form of Excel spreadsheets or not enough headcount to make sense of the mass measures of data. This leads into the next problem we see, which is the scan data isn't integrated with threat intelligence, so they had no real-time context for scan results. The context may have been based on a CVSS score, which is a static point in time that could have been assigned weeks ago. Without this real-time context of what critical vulnerabilities you should be devoting your time to, it made the process of prioritizing the vulns very difficult. Having thousands of vulnerabilities within an environment, it's important to know that you're dedicating your time to remediating what is successfully being exploited out in the wild today. And finally, communication was painful. They had no way to showcase their progress to their colleagues, managers, and line of business. Being able to communicate why one vuln is being addressed over another, all the way up to the executive level where communicating risk posture and exposure to stakeholders is very important. You want to know what trends over time are or how the remediation and reduction of overall risk is going in general. Getting this seamless, wholesome view of risk posture can be pretty challenging. So here's how Kenna works in a nutshell. And it's important to note that this is the genesis of our CTO, Ed Bellis, who was previously the CISO at Orbitz, the travel company. This was the world he was living in, where he had mass amounts of great scan data coming from infrastructure scans, web scans, and other significant feeds, but none of them were tied together. He decided to create Kenna, a platform that fits in Amazon AWS cloud, as a way to aggregate all that scanning information into a single pane of glass, dedupe it, normalize it on a CVE or CWE, so you have a really good view of your entire attack surface. Kenna creates in a single dashboard what your environment consists of and what needs to be addressed first. Taking this view of your environment a step further, we now want to address tying in our numerous exploit intelligence feeds that include the likes of Alien Vault OTX, Metasploit DB, Exploit DB, plus more that are listed on our website. We have around 10 feeds today that actively integrate into your scanner data that is ingested into Kenna. Combining this threat intelligence then with your scanner data into one easy-to-read dashboard that will make your life easier, Kenna will then be able to tell you not only that a particular vulnerability exists in your environment, but that there are currently hackers out there today exploiting this same vulnerability at other organizations. So you should probably focus your remediation efforts here first, because this vulnerability is more at risk. As a lot of this automation is done behind the scenes by Kenna by applying our algorithms, this allows a security analyst to get a more efficient work done in less time. This also creates seamless workflow so the IT ops get a good picture and understanding of why they should remediate a particular vulnerability over another one. We can make sure then that the analyst can report to the CISO, and the CISO can report to the board on progress and how you're doing with a particular vulnerability they may have read about in the paper. This seamless line of communication throughout all levels of your organization is unique and allows each line of combat to understand what they are accountable for and easily be able to communicate that to other members of the team. So here are some common vulnerabilities that I'm sure most of you have heard of. This is simply a depiction of the differences you can see between a normal CVSS score that many IT security teams prioritize off of compared to the Kenna score, which is taking into account our threat intelligence. The Kenna score shows you a scoring of your most critical vulns based off of exploitation in the wild today. Once again, CVSS is a static scoring system, and in some cases you can see that the two can be the same, while in other cases the scores can be very different. Take, for example, Poodle, where if you just looked at the CVSS score for that, you may not place as high a priority there, whereas Kenna is telling you that no, you should probably be placing a higher priority on this vuln based off of what hackers are exploiting elsewhere currently. So with all that said, I'll hand things over to Linda now to take away the exciting demo portion of the webinar. Linda, all you.
Thanks, Kelly. So thanks everybody for joining. Let me just pull up our demo environment here, and Kelly will be monitoring the question section, and we'll address those at the end just for the sake of time, but feel free to post questions as they come up. So as Kelly said, you know, the bread and butter of Kenna, our secret sauce, is really about how we manage scoring in Kenna. So when you define data that's going to come into Kenna via what we call our connectors, and you can assign those for a whole host of built-in vendor-supported connectors or data sources. You can bring those into Kenna. Kenna's job is to really normalize that data so that it can be commonly scored and assessed uniformly across the organization, and also present that unified risk picture upward in the organization, as Kelly mentioned. So the first step to that is to bring in the vulnerabilities, which will have a scoring kind of from 0 to 100. And it is based on the CVSS score. So we do use that as part of our calculation. But then, as Kelly mentioned, we bring in 10 unique live data threat feeds that will include information about what is being actively breached in the wild, what things have Metasploit toolkits available from out in the wild. If today the hackers don't really have to go in and individually code an attack against your website. If they want to target you, they can buy a pre-made program, basically, essentially like you would buy Excel, except this one is to take advantage of a particular vulnerability that exists commonly in organizations. They can just buy that code, point it at your site or your organization's network, and see if you're vulnerable and gain access that way. So it's really made it easier for anyone that wants to attack your company to get a foothold without having to be the hardest of hardcore hackers out there. So these are probably our two biggest items as far as scoring goes. If these two items are set, you're going to see the score go way up. And that's where you get the differences, like you saw on the last slide that Kelly presented, where the CVSS might be low, but if it is an active internet breach and it's easily exploitable, you're going to see that score up. Now, we're also able to, because we have over 1 billion vulnerabilities under management, we're also able to use that data to understand, in conjunction with those threat feeds, what is a popular target today. So that is also a component of scoring. The 0-day feature is an add-on to the product, and we may have time to get to that today, and we may not, but I'll try to touch on it if we have time. So here we have the CVSS scores. We come to the Kenna vulnerability score of 0 to 100. And like I said, that's going to take into account these threat factors. And so you'll see if we start to narrow things using those threat factors to see, for example, only the things that have active internet breaches and are easily exploitable. You'll see that we're only going to get, or not, we're only going to get the higher scoring items. This one didn't go up too much because it was already a low CVSS score. But you can definitely see that overall our risk meter score went up, and I'm going to talk about that scoring here in a minute. So the vulnerability score then for Kenna, again, not really changing or something that you as a customer would change, but it can change hourly based on this threat intel. So as we get information from those threat feeds, an item is suddenly easily exploitable, is suddenly an active internet breach, we will adjust the score in Kenna. So you may see score changes, but it's not really modifiable by you, the customer. These vulnerability scores roll up to network assets in your organization. And those scores range from 0 to 1,000, and they're based on, yeah.
We have a couple of questions that came in, one that's valid to what you're talking about right now. Okay. Is this based on CVSS version 2 or 3?
That's a good question. I believe it's based on 3, and we get everything from the NIST database, from the national database. So it's based on the data that they have.
Okay, and then, all right, we'll save the last one for after you finish. Thanks, Linda.
Okay, sure. So the vulnerability scores then roll up into an asset. And Kenna uses a methodology that says that an asset is as at risk as its highest vulnerability. So these are not averages based on all the vulnerabilities on the host. This is based on the highest vulnerability found on the host. You take that times the priority of the asset and you get a score. So this asset, we can say, has a 100 level vulnerability times a priority score of 10, and you get an asset score of 1,000. And then depending on how you group those assets, you'll see in this dial the average for all of the assets that you're looking at in a particular group. Now, I happen to click on our homepage, which is all the assets. But within Kenna, of course, you want to slice and dice it, based on all the views that Kelly was talking about. Your operational teams need a view, your management teams need a view, your executive teams need a view. All that slicing and dicing gives you different counts of assets with different scores. So in this case, we're only looking at 19 assets for our finance group. When we average the scores of the assets in this group, we come up with a risk meter score of 650. So again, the vulnerability score is not at all modifiable by the users and is based on the Kenna risk scoring with the threat feeds. The asset score, you can control somewhat because these priorities are adjustable, although there's all sorts of best practices around that. So you can talk more with a customer success engineer to get information on that. But you can adjust this priority to say, well, I have some internal assets that maybe should be a 5 or a 6, because we know they have mitigating controls, they're behind a few firewalls, so you can adjust that number. And then that in turn will affect your overall risk score. So the risk meter is just a standard 3-way split of red, amber, and green, with 330 and 670 being the cutoffs for the various risk levels. And really the way you approach it is typical to how you would approach anything in risk, with a red, amber, green rating, with green meaning within appetite, amber meaning approaching being out of risk appetite, and red being out of risk appetite. So if you want to create these groups in Kenna, there's all sorts of things that you can do to slice and dice the data. We do get metadata from the scanners, which we turn into tags in Kenna. It can be tags, business units, asset groups. It depends on the scanner type, what we pull in, but virtually any type of metadata we can get from the scanner, we pull in and turn into tags. Those then become available in Kenna, and you can just simply click on those tags, as we did here to create the finance group. We simply chose anything that has a tag of finance should be included in this group. Then in subsequent scans, if new devices are added, they have a tag of finance, or they're part of the asset group on the scanner side of finance, they're going to automatically be included in this group of assets. Now we also have, in addition to all sorts of checkboxes and sliders here that you can use to narrow your result set, we also have complex searching capabilities via our search box, where you can and or things together. Or in the example of operating system, things come through, as you can see here, just in the couple of servers that we have. Some of them have service packs added to them. Some of them just have the Windows version. It's hard to kind of tell always how the operating system is going to be delivered exactly from the scanner. So in that case, if you wanted to create, for example, a Windows risk meter, you could come in and say Windows with wildcards. And instead of having to select 20 checkboxes, and actually that is more interesting if I do it off the home page. So let me go off the home page. So if you want to wildcard and get where the OS is Windows, you can get that without having to check a number of different checkboxes to make sure you have all the right different phrasing of OS. And also, if new things get added over the next year, they're going to automatically be included in your risk meter. So the checkboxes are nice, but you also have the search box where you can add in additional information. You can also create not queries. So if this case, if we wanted to see desktops, so we wanted to say where it equals Windows but not server, if I could spell, then you can come in and say, okay, this is our desktop population. And whenever you have a query that you like for these 665 assets, you can save that group in Kenna. Now, an asset group in Kenna, or a saved query, or a risk meter, that's all the same things. So as soon as I save this, and I'll just call it Windows Desktops, I'm going to get a couple things in Kenna. So one of the things I'm going to get is I'm going to have this risk meter part of my dashboard, so that I can come in and see it on a regular basis. You can organize the risk meters that you get into sort of areas of specialization so you don't have to see all of them at once. So for example, we have a Windows environment group. I can come in and I can say, well, I'd also like to see the Windows desktops that I just included, and then save that dashboard view to look at the Windows desktops. Now, there's also ways to filter and make sure you have everything. From here, you can go in and look for just anything that has Windows in the name. You can also sort or filter by color. So if you only want to see what's red in the organization, you can do that. It's just an easy way to present the data in Kenna. If you want to remember which items you use for executive reporting, that's another group. And this is really of benefit to administrators that have a view of all sorts of dashboards. Now, the other thing that you get as soon as you hit save is you get reporting. So we're going to take nightly snapshots of how that group of assets is going, how the risk is, how vulnerability management's going. And let me just show you what that will look like. So we can see that, it had a high score. It's kind of slowly gone down. Of course, this is demo data, so, we're not really fixing things. Oh, and it's only 2 assets. Maybe not the best example. But you get the risk meter over time. You'll get the active asset count and vulnerability count over time. You can see how many high risk assets you have. So while an average is nice as far as the risk meter is concerned, there are cases where you'll get to amber, where you have thousands of assets, and amber tells one story, but another story is within that amber, which is the average of the high and the risk, you kind of lose that detail. This is the way to split out that detail and say, well, that's all well and good, but how many high risk assets do I still have in the organization? And you can make determinations on whether or not that's acceptable or not. Is the average important? Is it important to get rid of all the high risk assets? Those kinds of conversations are easy to have when you have the data in front of you. So there's all sorts of things here, and I can always go into detail on these, or you can if you do a POC with Kenna. We do mean time to remediate, so how long does it take teams to resolve high, medium, and low risk vulnerabilities? And then you can also see the status of the asset and vulnerabilities over time, and also all the vulnerabilities in the tool. So in addition to the risk meters, you get the top fixes. And let me just show you a little bit more detail why the top fixes are so important. So if I am an operational manager and I'm coming into Windows desktops or workstations, I'm going to use one that already had some data prior to today, and I want to know which of these 741 vulnerabilities I should fix first. I can go in and I can use the nice filtering in Kenna to go down and say, okay, these are 37 fixes that I should get done because they are of high risk to the organization. I could even further use this to slide the risk score here and say, maybe I only want to look at things that are 90 and 100. All right, now I'm down to 24 fixes. This number keeps going down. Maybe this is the set of fixes that I want to get my teams on. But when you start to look at this, you'll see that we had a very high volume of vulnerabilities before we started filtering. This is only going to knock 9 of them out. This is only going to knock 8 of them out. Is this really the most efficient way to get the score down? It's a little bit hard to tell from here. Now, if we did decide this was one we wanted to fix, we could send it to one of our ticketing, and we'd usually only have one, but in this case, they're all in demo. But I could send it off to my ticketing system and have my teams work on it. But Kenna takes it a step further. So we have these nice ways that you can filter the data to see what you should fix first. But Kenna went further and created what we call our top fixes view. And this is, again, available for any saved group of assets. So as soon as you hit save, you create that group. It's available on the dashboard. We're going to go out and find this view for you. And this is the fastest way to reduce your score across all of the assets in the group. Now, they're not always going to be the things that are 90 and 100s. Of course, those will bubble to the top just because they're the high vulnerabilities. But you may get things in here where there are things that are 80, but when you fix them on the machine, it's going to drop the machine to 40. Because again, assets are scored by their highest vulnerability. So if you only have one high thing on a system and it's going to drop dramatically with that single fix, that may be a great place to start. This is purely math-based, but certainly when remediation teams start to think about how their progress is going to be reported up to management, this is a great way for teams to understand what their risk reduction is going to be based on any 1 to 3 fixes that are grouped into a top fix group in Kenna. And we provide up to 10 of these. Everywhere across the tool, you can export to CSV. So that's true of assets, vulnerabilities, fixes, these top fix groups. So I can take those down for myself or email them to a group. I can get one group or many. And again, from here, I can send them to the ticketing system. We also have a way to email each of these items off to a group as well. And that could be, either a team that handles risk or a team that handles remediation. So there's all sorts of things we haven't had a chance to cover today, but I did want to talk a little bit about some of the other ways in Kenna that we can help you get rid of noise. So first of all, the big thing we talked about as far as noise goes is the Kenna risk score. When you look at CVSS, and again, Kelly mentioned this in her last slide, there are a lot of differences in how Kenna will score things and how CVS, the raw score, handles things. The majority of vulnerabilities and CVSS will end up in the 7 to 10 range. So that means that if you use the raw CVSS score and you looked for high vulnerabilities, the bucket of fixes that teams would have to look at would be much bigger than if you looked at what Kenna says are high vulnerabilities. And what does this mean for you? What this means for you is that there's less noise at the high level. It's almost as though Kenna is making sure we're not crying wolf on the vulnerabilities that remediation teams are told they should run fire drills for, right? Or, it's a real fire and they need to go put it out. So with that bucket smaller, if we want to use WannaCry as an example, those vulnerabilities came out in February. They would have been marked as high in Kenna. And in an organization where that high bucket has 100 fixes, it would have been a lot more likely that those vulnerabilities would have been addressed before they became active internet breaches and easily exploitable than if they were one of 500 high vulnerabilities. So Kenna, first off, reduces that noise for teams by restricting and limiting what we call high based on that threat intel. Now, the next part of reducing noise is to use this priority score if you want to, so that your external assets are, rightly said to hold more risk for the organization than internal applications. Things that are behind web application firewalls and other tools may have mitigating factors that mean that, less remediation is done or they have less priority in the organization. So another way to sift through the noise. And then finally, for any given vulnerability in Kenna, you can also come in and reduce the noise by saying, listen, we have a vulnerability that we can't modify because the application's being replaced next year, and until it is, we can't fix Java. Well, you can use risk accepted and false positive statuses in Kenna to further eliminate the noise, and there's best practices around using these too. But again, these can help you make sure that only actionable items get to the remediation teams so that they can stay focused on getting those things fixed for the organization. So there's a lot of other things that I can talk about, but we're out of time today. So hopefully, if you aren't already using Kenna, you'll look at doing a proof of concept with us, taking a look at the tool and digging in. And certainly, we have all sorts of folks available to answer additional questions for you and talk to you about some of the other features we have, like the ability to set SLAs and SLA policies. There's alerts in here for administrators and users of the tool. You can break things up so that users can only see certain risk meters, so that your Windows team, for example, could come in and only see 2 or 3 risk meters instead of that broader view. So that's really helpful to a lot of my customers. And there's all sorts of tool items available out on our help center. More tips on searching, more tips on and information about the various connectors we support and things like that. So Kelly, any other questions I should address before we wrap up?
Yeah, it looks like we have one more we should try to get to, Linda. The question is, how does this take into penetration test results which expose coding issues and infrastructure that is misconfigured?
Great question. So in addition to what I've talked about here, which has been primarily focused on CVE, Kenna also will ingest and score CWE items, which is the web application testing equivalent to CVE, and also WASI classes, which are sort of it's the same thing, but more in a broader categorization of web vulnerabilities as opposed to CWE. But we support both. And so those items are also scored in Kenna. And real quickly, I believe we have some in here. So there's some Fortify, some AppScan. I thought we had Qualys WAS. Guess not. But you can see things come in, SQL injection items. It says where the vulnerability came from. The only difference is that the asset to vulnerability ratio is a little bit different on this side of the house because an asset is considered a page as opposed to a host. So you will see a higher number of assets that appear for this type of data. But same thing, the CVSS score is used with either the WASI category or the CWE score to address these. Another difference is you won't see fixes because these aren't generally patches. These are things where an actual coder is going to have to go in and determine how to eliminate the SQL injection vulnerability. And so because they're not patches, they don't appear on the fixes tab. However, they do roll up to the assets and the risk meters. And so in a single risk meter, you could have the IP addresses for the application, as well as searching for the URLs or file path names for that application. And you would have a combined score across all the different risk vectors in a single risk meter.
Great, thank you, Linda. So it definitely looks like we've run out of time by now. So if we didn't get to your questions, we will do so after the end of the webinar. So on behalf of Kenna, I just want to thank Linda for joining me on the webinar today. We both really enjoyed presenting to such an engaged group, and I want to thank you, the attendees. We look forward to connecting with you again, so please feel free to reach out with any questions. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.